Welcome back to another episode from The Lawyer You Know, and today we're going to talk about the COVID vaccine's effect on the workplace, whether you're an employee or an employer. We've done a couple videos on this COVID vaccine, and we told you that some employers are going to be able to force employees to take this vaccine, but the EEOC just came down with some guidance in late December of 2020 on how it can be applied equally to all employees. The EEOC has a huge voice in America. They are, in fact, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They bring down the rules that make sure we protect our constitutional rights. And the big rights that need to be protected with this COVID vaccine are twofold for the most part. Number one, how do people with disabilities deal with this? And number two, religious freedom and anti-vaxxers, if they have a strongly held belief that makes them not be able to take this COVID vaccine, are you just going to be able to terminate all these employees? We'll start with the disabilities. The EEOC has come down the pipe and said that if forcing your employees, which employers may do, the EEOC confirms that employers may force their employees to take this vaccine, if that eliminates all your disabled workers, is that okay? Can you just terminate all the disabled workers that say they can't take this vaccine because of their disability? And the answer is no, unless you put it through this four-part test to determine the significance of the risk that's being posed by these unvaccinated workers. And what that means is you have to determine how serious the risk of spreading this COVID-19 virus to the rest of your workforce by the person that's unvaccinated. Things that are going to be important with that is how closely do they work together? Do they share a cubicle? Do they share a phone? Do they share a bathroom? Do they talk to each other? Do they pass things back and forth where everybody's touching the same document or the same tool? Those are going to be important factors, but the EEOC sets forth a four-part test that goes like this. Number one, the duration of the risk posed. Number two, the nature and severity of the potential harm. Number three, the likelihood potential harm would occur. And number four, the imminence of the potential harm. So you have to determine, and basically it's just saying, will this unvaccinated employee pass COVID around the office if they were to get it because they are not vaccinated? And if you determine as an employer that they do pose a significant harm or a potential threat that is too significant and can't be eliminated, you can terminate that employee even if they have a disability that requires them not to take that COVID vaccine. But if you can provide a reasonable accommodation, you have to do so in order to allow that disabled employee to continue to work for you. The reasonable accommodation that you're going to hear for the coming months and years dealing with COVID, because again, it doesn't look like it's going anywhere, is going to be remote work. Can you supply or allow that employee to work remotely? Can you set them up to work from home? Can you set them up to work from a different office so they don't have to come into contact with the vaccinated employees because they're unvaccinated because of their disability? If you are able to do that as an employer, you have to do that as opposed to terminating them. The EEOC wants to set up as many opportunities to give these disabled employees an opportunity to continue to work at their current place of employment even if they're unable to take this COVID-19 vaccine. But they also want to make it available for these employers to force all of their employees to take a COVID-19 vaccine in order to provide a safe workplace according to the EEOC. Remote work is not the only reasonable accommodation. So you have to determine as an employee if there are any other reasonable accommodations. For instance, if you work construction and you need your employees to be there, all hands on deck, remote work is not going to work for that. So you need to determine if there are any other reasonable accommodations that you can provide for these employees that are disabled in a way that does not allow them to take this COVID-19 vaccine. The EEOC recommends that all employers consult JAN, the Job Accommodation Network site, which we're going to link below in this video, before terminating any of these disabled employees or employees that can't take the COVID-19 vaccine. Try to find an accommodation, go through the checkpoints, document everything that you did to search for these reasonable accommodations, and if you can't find any and you have to make the decision to terminate this employee at the end of the day, at least you'll be well documented and you did everything you could to try to keep them on your workforce even though they couldn't take that COVID-19 vaccine. All right, religious beliefs, no vaccine for me, my religion says I can't. What do you do in that situation if you are an employer? Well, again, because of our religious liberties in this country, because of our constitutional rights, we as employers have to do everything we can to try to find a reasonable accommodation to allow them to continue working for us, even though their religious beliefs do not allow them to take the COVID-19 vaccine that some employers may force on their employees. And what is a reasonable accommodation? That's accommodation that does not create an undue hardship on the employer. It's minimal cost, it's a minimal burden on the employer. It can't be something that costs $1 million or forces an employer to completely change the way they do business just to create an accommodation for one of their employees that can't work because of this COVID-19 vaccine. So at the end of the day, the 4-part test to determine how big a risk is that an unvaccinated employee is going to spread COVID throughout the workforce if you do, as an employer, force the COVID vaccine on your employees, that's what you have to determine. And if that risk is significant, if that is an imminent threat that you think is going to happen in your workforce, then you have to take the next step to see if you can give them a reasonable accommodation. If you can, give it to them, have them continue working and staying away from the rest of your workforce. If you can't, if there is no accommodation that's reasonable, no accommodation that can have you continue running business as usual, then you are allowed to terminate that employee for failure to take that COVID-19 vaccine. When administering this vaccine as an employer, this is just a side note. The EEOC recommends you use a third party to do all of it, the administration, the testing, the medical documentation, so you stay out of it completely as an employer. You don't mix that file with their employment file, with their personnel file. You have that kept somewhere completely separate, so you, even as the employee, don't know any of this information, so you don't come in contact with information you shouldn't have, and you don't risk spreading who may have had COVID, who the vaccine worked on, who it didn't work on, whatever it may be. You don't need that information as an employer. You don't want it. Ignorance is bliss in this situation. Have a third party administer the vaccine and deal with all those medical issues. If you like this content as an employer, as an employee, like this video, subscribe to our channel for more content like this. If you have any specific questions about your business, whether you're an employee or an employer, leave a comment, shoot the question over. I'm happy to have some dialogue with you and give you the best answer I can. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with you next time.